it's my great pleasure to introduce the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Croatia, Zdravko Marić, who is joining us here from his office and very kindly agreed to answer a couple of questions about the status of Croatia, how Croatia's finances are doing in this very difficult period. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you and to everybody who is listening, watching, and following us.
Thank you. So, Zdravko, the first question I'd like to address is, you've joined ERM2, so Croatia's on track for full Eurozone membership. 2 years from now is the timetable, January 23. What are the main things that you need to do this year and next year in order to stick to that timetable?
Well, indeed, it was a great and a big step for us. I'm sure that you are very much familiarized that Croatia is a quite highly Euroized economy. And since we entered formally into European Union back in the mid-2013, very soon we started communicating that obviously our next some kind of aim would be to join Euroland. However, we needed to fulfill certain pre-steps, let's say so, primarily in the area of fiscal policy. By doing so, Croatian National Bank and the government prepared communication with European institutions, and we sent letters of our intent to join ERM2 and enter into the close cooperation with ECB, which was in the mid-2019, where we emphasized and stressed 19 measures in 6 different fields as some kind of a prerequisite to enter into ERM2. We stick to that agenda despite COVID at the beginning of 2020, and we managed to fulfill all these measures even before the deadline. And in the mid-2020, we entered into ERM2. From today's perspective, it seems that the timetable is quite clear. You pointed out correctly, so minimum 2 years, which means soonest is the beginning of 2023. However, of course, in the meantime, we need again to fulfill certain criteria. People are predominantly familiarized with the Maastricht, 4 or 5, depending how do we count them. But also certain post-entry into ERM2 commitments, which we stress to further improve our anti-money laundering system, better public governance, certain additional reductions in the overall, I would say, tax, non-tax, and parafiscal charges, I mean, burden for the economy, and also to improve the overall insolvency framework. But I would stick to the Maastricht criteria. So even before joining ERM2, Croatia was completely in line with Maastricht. However, due to today momentum, particularly in 2020, which means the consequences of COVID, from today's angle, fiscal criteria will be again, I would say, quite important, or the most important, particularly the level of deficit.
Yeah. That's really anticipating my second question, because of course, as you say, Croatia has a fantastic record on debt to GDP ratios, admirable record, and it is quite strange, it seems like now, I think, to be talking about Maastricht criteria at a time when most of the big countries in the Eurozone would certainly not meet the so-called Maastricht criteria today, and indeed that's not something completely new either. But obviously, COVID and your fiscal efforts to mitigate that, clearly, we were talking in the green room a moment ago about the Dalmatian coast. Obviously, tourism, the hit to tourism has been a major setback for the Croatian economy. But given all of the efforts you've had to make, fiscally expansive efforts to mitigate COVID, how much have you had in your mind as you've been doing that, the convergence criteria, and whether you would continue to meet those Maastricht measures?
Yeah, Well, maybe just to recall some additional memories, in the first half of 2020, Croatia was for the first time leading the presidency of European Union. And during our presidency, unfortunately, the COVID as a pandemic in European Union started before that, even in some other, of course, Far East countries. However, taking into account, I would say, all our experience from the previous crisis, as well as obviously dialogue that we had with other finance ministers, governors, prime ministers, and other of European Union, we initiated procedure that for 2020, we have a temporary suspension of the fiscal rules, which meant that we had more freedom and maneuver space on the top of defending human lives and health, that we also protecting work, jobs, and overall employment. And that's what we have been doing and what we are doing as a European Union, but also as individual member states. I can tell you, and I can witness you from the angle of Croatia, we entered into this crisis in a much better shape than we entered into the previous crisis. And one of the key reasons for my statement that I just delivered is predominantly lying in the fiscal area. The consolidation of budget and of our overall fiscal policy, reduction of public debt caused us, and I would say brought certain fiscal stimulus package that we have been having at the very beginning of this crisis, while we have been still waiting for the European Union funds, for the IFI funds, etc., that we can intervene immediately. However, going forward, we believe that obviously the crisis and pandemic will not last forever, that there will be some kind of end of it, and eventually there will be the end of the temporary suspension of the fiscal rules. With our intention to join Euro, we entered into the budgetary process for 2021 with the envisaged, or I would say targeted level of deficit inside 3%, so back to 2.9, after a few years of budgetary surplus, and I mean headline surplus, and after a few years with a significant reduction of public debt. Maybe just to recall, from 2015, when there was a peak of public debt in the level of around 86% of GDP, we decreased it to 73% end of 2019. Without COVID, we would already be inside 70%. When you translate Maastricht criteria and the provisions, that means that we have been decreasing our public debt 4 times faster than the criteria are, I would say, requiring. The same idea, or I would say the same plan we have. So we see COVID consequences in 2020 as a one-off, and we see already 2021 as the year again with the decline trend of the public debt in GDP.
Excellent. Well, it's a very compelling story, certainly. We just got a minute or two left. I just want to ask you one really quick question. V-shaped recovery in 21, tourists flooding back?
We don't see complete recovery. The complete recovery of our economy at this stage, we see at the end or latest stage of 2022, tourism recovering even slightly later. However, depending, of course, on the pandemic and on a vaccine and everything, however, we still believe that we would be able to deliver a good touristic season. In 2020, our original estimate was a drop of 70%, 7-0 drop. At the end of the day, it was around 50% drop. So quite sizable, but better than originally expected. Yeah.
Yes, not quite fatal.
Yes, yeah.
And really quickly, just 1 minute on quantitative easing. This is of the central bank, obviously, and we have Boris Vucic on the panel later on. But the central bank has been purchasing debt. How do you view the timescale for getting out of QE?
Our QE for the first time in this kind of a manner, and I need to say almost completely identical to the ones in the Euroland. It was, I think, very successful. It was a very timely, adequate at the very beginning of the crisis, and it served its purpose. So, National Bank did all the decisions in the main, either to engage in a government bond purchase or not. It determines relevant amounts as well as the pricing and other technical aspects. But at the same time, all of these purchases have been carried out exclusively in the secondary market. It didn't bring any kind of inflationary pressures or depreciation pressures, as we have been seeing in maybe some other countries. One of the key reasons for that, we still hold quite sizable amount of international reserves. At the same time, the ratio of non-residents holdings in domestic bonds is less than 3%. So we stick pretty much to the original domestic bond, and all these funds, I would say, remained where they are. And at the end of the day, we have a quite deep and developed domestic financial market, predominantly pension funds, but also commercial banks, investment funds. So again, that particular bond purchase as a program served its purpose well, and I think it was really a good move.
Excellent. So it's not going to become a lifestyle choice for Croatia. Very good. Zdravko, great pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry it's so brief. We could have talked for ages, but thank you very much for answering our questions, and we hope to get you to physical Vienna next year.
I need to say thank you very much for the conversation and for all your colleagues for preparing this chat. I need to say really very much looking forward in seeing you physically in Vienna as soon as possible.
Great stuff. Thanks very much indeed, Minister.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.